people are like, oh yeah, we did it in Japanese yen equivalent, whereas others are like, no, we didn't.
Well,
So
I was looking at Bitbo, and on
okay.
Bitbo we hit it. So that's what I'm going by these days. I love that that website.
I love
So that's what
football.
I'm going by.
They did a good job.
So I came across you on Twitter, and then I heard you on some Clubhouse discussions. And being that you're in Canada like me, I thought it would be fun to have a chat. So for those people that are listening that don't maybe haven't come across you yet, why don't we get the brief introduction, then we'll get going.
Sure. So my name is Megs, Crypto Megs on Twitter. You may know me from such hits as Quadriga. I did not found it, but I am a bankruptcy inspector, been appointed by the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia to represent all affected users and to direct EY, the trustee, in varying decisions around the bankruptcy proceedings. I've been really involved in the Canadian regulatory scene in terms of helping bring together the crypto ecosystem to respond back to regulators. And a lot of that does stem from Quadriga. When it fell, the regulators were basically like, oh crap, can I swear by the way?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, yeah, the regulators were basically, oh shit. We need to catch up, and they came in full force on regulations. So industry needed to kind of respond back, because if you're silent, like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and if you don't squeak, the regulators just kind of assume, hey, everything's hunky-dory, let's go, right? I've been involved in a whole bunch of just other things, some voluntary. I'm working with Blockchain for Climate. It's a nonprofit, and we're working, trying to figure out how to best put global carbon accounts on the blockchain. I know a lot of you don't love the blockchain, and nor do you love NFTs, depending on which Bitcoiner you are, but it is one of the best currently available options to explore. Yes, maybe at some point we'd love to put it on Bitcoin, but that's not there now. Prior to BC, before Bitcoin, no, that's not it. But anyways, prior to my time going down the rabbit, sorry?
BB, before
BB,
Bitcoin.
yeah, exactly, BB. Prior to my time falling down the rabbit hole, I spent about 10 years in government working largely around economic development issues. So whether that was electricity pricing, or really helping Ontario transition to a low carbon economy. So a lot of that was helping first design cap and trade and some of the other initiatives around it, for example, low carbon fuels. And then afterwards, how do we take these 5 billion in proceeds and recycle them throughout the economy? So for example, if 2 billion is allocated to industry and businesses, how do we get them to stay here, compete, lower their energy use? And that's really, that experience really fits well, I think, with mining, which is something that I've been working on more recently. Just, it's nice to be able to merge sort of my prior energy and carbon experience and heavy industry with Bitcoin. So, and other than that, like you'll see me all over the place. I do the V sports, so Bitcoin esports, some really great work by the Mint Gox team. Been dabbling in some crypto art. Want to do some of my own, but also there's a really cool project being led called the Bitcoin Voice Paper that I'm a part of. I'm super excited to see that come out, and just helped crypto graffiti with some of his work. So I'm kind of all over the place. Now on Clubhouse.
So yeah. So is your background in legal? Like, is that what?
No, it's not in legal. It's around policy. So policy is kind of the strategy area of government. So it sets sort of the strategy around various areas, whether that's energy pricing, whether that's carbon pricing, or even just economic development. It's really like, how do we bring businesses, companies here? How do we keep them here? Bring jobs, not have jobs exit. How do we attract talent? Whether that's developers, designers, engineers. Canada, the Kitchener-Waterloo corridor, for example, is really well known for engineers and tech talent. So, those kind of policy decisions.
So how did you wind up being involved in the Quadriga case?
Well, I'm one of the lucky few that lost money. No, not lucky, but it's kind of an experience. I call it, what is it? It's kind of like trial by fire, or you know, when you get involved is kind of which exchange you were a victim of, right? So I'm the Quadriga era victim. The others were Mount Gox, right? So yeah, no, I lost money and I became really involved trying to disseminate information, read through the legal documents, just because I used to help draft regulations, legislation. A lot of the documents were, you know, going through the court hearings. So I was just like diving through them to scour what info I could find. I mean, in general, I think so many people got involved to both try to solve that mystery from the perspective of, you know, who was Gerald Cotton? And there's some really great work. One of the people was QCXINT. He really dove into like who Gerald was, uncovered that he used to run Ponzi schemes since he was 15, worked with Michael Patron. And I think it was really amazing how like the community came together to both, you know, whether that was Kraken offering $100,000 reward for information or just, you know, people coming together to try to solve it. And I think it's kind of like, don't fuck with technical crypto folks because they have the skills to go and deep dive and try to find stuff out. Like, oh, here's an IP address, let me connect it to this guy. And, you know, it's just like, we're way more technical. A lot of us can do tracing ourselves. You know, you don't need to, or be willing to, you know, pay for additional tracing info, especially those that lost a lot of money. So I think we're not like the old lady pensioner who somebody takes advantage of. Like we're a little more dangerous than that. So I think Quadriga was awesome. It was one of those things where, you know, typically we have all these tribes and they kind of, well, you know how cats and dogs, right? But that was one area where, you know, when something really threatens our sector, we come together. So that was one of those moments. Another one was that recent FinTrack, in the US, FinCEN, you know, the regs that came down kind of around New Year's / Christmas, and everyone had only 15 days to write a response. Like I love when our industry comes together like that.
Right. But he did well. What is your conclusion on the status of that guy after all? You know, because the official line is that he died in India, right? But yeah, you could make the case that despite what you just said, he kind of did get away with it all.
Yeah, so well, it's funny because, well, first of all, lots of NDAs. But this is like kind of my own personal opinion. So initially I was like, this is really suspicious. 215 million is gone. Really crazy circumstances around his death in the sense that A, it's India. B, he died in the hospital, but then his body was taken to his hotel room. Then it was brought back to the hospital who said, no, this is not standard procedure. So then I was taken to a medical university to be processed. And that medical university, the director, like 2 months or 3 months before, had been accused of corruption. So it's just kind of like weird circumstances that made you think, maybe something funny is going on. But the Ontario Securities Division, Ontario Securities Commission, OSC, did this big deep dive. They actually hired a tracing company to follow the trail of money. And what we learned was that he was a shit trader. So there were never really cold wallets in play. Like the Quadriga website's like, oh, we have cold wallets, you're super safe, secure. No, that was not the case. He was just taking the money, sending it to other exchanges. There were a few, probably international ones, and trading badly, might I add, you know, on margin. And so he lost, I think it was around $140 million. There was another 40 million-ish that we recovered. So he bought plane, cars, boat, multiple houses. So in that sense, it was kind of lucky because he took creditor funds, bought these items, but these were things that we could then seize and you know, cash out in. So the homes were sold, et cetera, et cetera. So now there is a pool of funds available. And then there was some money that, again, initially, while it was not great, the bank froze those assets because he was commingling funds, and also his payment processors were commingling funds, as in taking own money and Quadriga money and just all on the same account. And so they froze it because it looked kind of suspicious. But before that got all untangled, like he wasn't able to go and trade it away for losses. So I think in that perspective, we were kind of lucky. So yeah, so those were the assets that were recovered, and there's still a little bit that's I think it's closer to 30 million. That's kind of questionable, but it's not like he could have run off with this 200 million. It's a lot less because of the trading losses sustained. So I think initially I was like, oh yeah, maybe he's alive, but it seems like less of a chance considering it's not like this $200 million that's gone. One really interesting thing is so he was basically running Quadriga from his laptop. I'm not kidding. There were no multi-signature wallets. No, seriously, it was just him. So nobody had access to it. Frankly, I'm surprised he didn't get hacked at any point, considering he was the only, source controlling it. Oh shoot, I lost my train of thought where I was going. What was I saying?
He was only operating Quadriga from his laptop.
Yeah. Multi-sig.
He was the only person in control.
No, I know. Oh, I lost my train of thought where that point was going.
Well, while you're thinking of it, so remind me again what the official story of regarding his death. He just died of what in India?
It said Crohn's. Some people say he technically, like, the kind of symptoms that he had, maybe wouldn't have caused his death. It's hard to say. So his body was sent back to Canada. We requested as committee and Representative Cancel Miller Thompson, the legal firm representing them, asked to dig the body up of the police, but we haven't heard that they have. So I'm not sure they're pursuing that route. The thing is, so yes, we could ask to dig up the body, but the problem is it could cost tens of thousands of legal fees. And with so little money recovered, it's like, okay, so let's say you find an answer, yes, he's alive, or no, he's not. It doesn't help you, like, it's not a direct act that would recover funds. So it's like, if there's certain things you want to spend on, it would more likely be something like finding funds. So we did, for example, decide to pursue some additional tracing. Like we secured the services of a tracing company to do some more analysis, and that's kind of maybe a better use of funds because it could maybe lead down the road to recovery. Whereas his death, yeah, it would be great to know, but do you really, like Jennifer, she might fight against, digging up the body. We have to pay for whatever it is they do, like DNA analysis, etc. And any kind of legal battle does really rack up tens of thousands of dollars, and you have to kind of decide at that point. People just want their money back. Yeah.
So non-official statement, gut feeling, is he alive or not alive right now?
I think after the OSC report, my gut feeling is he could be dead. Yeah. It's disappointing, I know.
And just for context, when because I want to ask you about a bunch of the other stuff on the regulatory side you've done.
I did remember one thing.
When did you get in?
Wait,
go for it.
One thing that's super interesting. Okay. Oh yes. So he was running the exchange off his laptop. It wasn't like super sophisticated. So Quadriga messed up. They remember the parity bug. So they lost 67,000 ETH, which is today valued at 150 million. If they there's some improvement proposals, like Ethereum improvement proposals proposed. I know Jesse from Kraken also, there's some money that got I think by the similar bug or something alike. So if there's ever an Ethereum improvement proposal, there is one right now, but if it ever goes through, it could really make a difference to victims because so little money got recovered. So if we could get that unlocked, that would be amazing. So that's what I remembered. So that's the only funds that are like probability of maybe being found.
You mean if they could do some kind of rollback or something?
Yeah, so there is a proposal for that. I don't know if it's considered a rollback. It's more like unlocking. It's some way that allows people to unlock it. I mean, we're not the only ones. We're probably one of the biggest ones in terms of how it affect how many funds were locked up by the parity bug. Polkadot too, I believe, had a lot of funds due to parity. So there are some. I mean, obviously, you know, it's one of those things like where the community will, you know, butt heads on. Some will be like, no rollbacks. I don't know if it's a rollback, no changes. Like this is what it is. Versus, and some might be like concerned around, you know, suddenly there's a 67,000 ETH that got unlocked. But I mean, we're moving to a point where there's so much more liquidity in markets where it's not as big a concern as it might have been, you know, 2 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't think many people, well, I don't think the major concern would be the added liquidity. It would be the act of the change, right? And what that means for pretty much everything. But that's we can crack into that if we have time later. But I wanted to ask when you got involved in Bitcoin, you know, at the start, both individually and then professionally, just for context of this conversation.
Yeah, so for myself, like one of those folks that like, hey, I heard about Bitcoin, maybe like 2013, 14, you read something, you're like, okay, that's interesting. You don't really dive into it. Maybe somebody mentions it again. It was really 2017 where I was like, whoa, what's this Bitcoin's really getting high there. What's going on, right? So of course you kind of like jump in as, hey, maybe I'll invest a little bit into this. And then it just sucks you in, as we all know, right? Because you start to read and you're like, okay, here's the white paper. Then you start to dive down even more rabbit holes. You're like, okay, I need to understand kind of like macroeconomic context and all the, like, it's just like, where do you stop? You know what I mean? In your learning. And I think too, there were kind of like pivotal moments for me where I remember trying to send some money. It was the same summer, like 2017. I had to send money to Europe, and I did it, you know, using crypto, and it was just like, holy shit, that was really fast. Because at the same time, I was trying to get money into Quadriga, and I remember standing in line at the post office with like a bank wire, and like, so there's like time of you standing there, time that it takes to send. I had to pay like $35 or something for like the draft. And I just like there's got to be a better way. And then within that time, like I sent money, and it was like, that was kind of my initial aha moment. From a personal standpoint, so my grandma had her land confiscated after the war. So Poland borders were redrawn, and her like beautiful property, like this garden that she used to tell me about, how she used to carry sunflowers, kind of like shield, like they were huge. And she just like, you know, all these wonderful memories of her living in Poland, and it was gone. It was no longer hers. So, you know, that kind of asset seizure, like from a personal standpoint, it was like, I understand, like nobody can take my Bitcoin. So, you know, all these like little things that you read about or you experience or you put together kind of builds your own Bitcoin story, I think.
Yeah. And so then off the back of that, you were determined to work in the space in your capacity of kind of developing policy?
Yeah. So initially I was like, okay, hey, you know, I'm sure there's regs coming, and governments take a really long time to make regulations and legislation. So first I was trying to kind of like go from within, right? I've already infiltrated, right? And so I was like, you know, just like, hey, did you know that, you know, Bitcoin miners, which, as I figured, I was in economic development at the time. So I was like, oh, maybe I can connect the dots. You know, they're kind of like an industrial, you know, manufacturer. You know, electricity prices are a big concern. We're always looking how to attract new industry, you know, so I was trying to kind of build that story up. I was trying, you know, there was Abitibi Water, I believe, was the pulp and paper company that was looking at secondary revenue streams. So, you know, like putting a Bitcoin miners within its facility, and then there was potential for heat recovery within that plant from the miners. So I think it was, you know, there was different stories we could tell about industrial synergies and you know, economic development and jobs, and investment into Canada. And so, but that, of course, that was the time where government was like, blockchain, not Bitcoin. Whoa, what's this sexy IBM blockchain thing, right? And they was still very much like, well, isn't this used by money launderers? You know, it was like 2017. So those stories, just like all the headlines, people kind of really, you know, took those, like that was kind of the overall high level impression they had. So then I thought, you know what, maybe I can do more from the outside. Maybe it was like become an advocate, work with industry to help, you know, kind of inform and educate the government. So I did do a lot of work where when the regs came out, really brought industry together. I held roundtables, virtual roundtables. So I led an effort there, had all the major exchanges, including Kraken, participate, and we submitted this big report. Four of us, you know, wrote everything up and submitted it to government. And I think the important part is a lot of times government does not have the right data. And this applies for US, Canada. So if they're making decisions, they need context. So if you can supply them with information like, hey, check out how much this contributes to the economy. You know, Coinbase alone, I'm sure, you know, significant revenues, right? And that's just one company alone. How many jobs do they bring? So all the big exchanges, like we're talking about over 1,000 employees from last I checked about a year ago. You know, so you kind of, and investment, like look at all the investment in terms of miners coming to North America. Like that's a lot of money that's being put into our like economies. And so those are typically the kinds of things that government wants: foreign direct investment, jobs, and you know, a bigger maybe tax base. And so you know, so I was dabbling in that. I got involved with 3IQ, helping them launch their Bitcoin fund. That was last year. So I was helping out on their IPO, going to all the banks, and that was a really interesting experience because you know, some guys got it, like, you know, we would go and sit before advisors and have this discussion about this fund that was launching. And you know, there would always be like that one old guy that was there to just kind of almost like laugh at it and ask silly questions like this is stupid kind of thing. A lot of the younger guys though were really interested in terms of advisors sitting down, and then, you know, like a few in between. It was such an early time though. Like I think so much has happened over the last year, and the kind of conversations and the level of sophistication, people understand it a lot more, whether it's in, you know, kind of like the banking world or even the corporates. So I think as an industry, you've come a long way. But yeah, so that was one of the main projects that I was involved with, other than Quadriga, was launching 3IQ's fund. And then now, I think it really helped pave the way to the ETF that's launching in 2 days, the 18th.
So just a point of clarity here, and you obviously don't have to answer if this is not publicly available information, but are you like an independent policy consultant, or do you work with like some larger policy group, or like what? I'm just trying to figure out how, like when 3IQ engages you, how does that go down?
I was a consultant there. Yeah, so I'm part of MetaMesh, so the group of us, one gentleman in Asia, Latin America, US, and Canada. So we provide consulting largely around, you know, Bitcoin, some areas of policy, but also things like business development strategy. You know, help you understand Bitcoin, but also we're also starting to really move into the educational space, posting some videos, content, making it a lot easier to understand. Maybe have a lady too in front, because we have so many guys on YouTube. I'm laughing at Ben. No, Ben sessions, BTC sessions is an amazing job. Yeah, and we also, you know, provide, in addition to kind of like consulting, because we've really dove into the multimedia aspect, we also, you know, provide multimedia services.
Right, and that's called MetaMesh. Is that, did I hear you right?
Yes. But I'm also being
META-MESH.
META mesh, MESH. Yes, metamesh.com. Yeah. I've also been diving more into the mining space, working on a stealth project.
So let me ask you that when you say you
call them stealth projects.
When you say you helped launch 3IQ, what kind of involvement did you have there? Like, was it in terms of helping to structure it before they submit to regulators so that all the language is right and that kind of stuff, or what was the involvement?
Yeah, no, so the heavy lifting in terms of the prospectus, that was done kind of like, so 3IQ really fought this kind of battle over about maybe 4 years to get their fund launched. So that was informing kind of the, back and forth with regulators. They actually ended up taking the Ontario Securities Commission to court for a hearing because they initially got their fund declined under the one of the main issues was the OSC said it's not in the public interest to for retail to participate in a fund like it, to invest in Bitcoin. And that was really interesting too, because I mean, look at Quadriga, right? And there were so many other kind of exchanges that are internationally that just kind of, got the rug pulled on them. People ran off with others' money. So I think like having, a vehicle that's fully regulated is probably much more in the public interest. So they went to court. I was there actually live tweeting, and I remember just like looking at some of the arguments at the time that the Ontario Securities Commission was making, like they were bringing forward, I want to call them tabloid crypto news, where they're like, oh, like so much manipulation is happening in crypto. And they weren't even talking about Bitcoin. It would be like talking about some shit coin. And they're saying like, look at how manipulated it is. So I think the kind of like arguments they brought forward weren't very like as informed as they should have been, to be honest. Sean Cumby did a fantastic job of arguing for the Bitcoin fund, and now he's currently has an ETF that's being that's currently in the works, waiting for regulatory approval. I thought his might be the first, but it was a different one. So all that kind of heavy lifting happened beforehand. What I was really involved in was helping with the initial public offering. So it was, meeting with various institutions, so like the Haywoods, Canacords, advisors that kind of hold wealth, and all the banks, so like TD, CIBC, basically all of the financial institutions, some VCs, some hedge funds. So going in, answering questions, creating documents for them to be informed and decide on, and kind of like being able to respond to any questions they have. And yes, even like the energy fund questions came up, right? So you're
pitching the fund.
Yeah, basically pitching the fund. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a
couple questions on that.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
It's a really interesting space, especially now, and so I want to hang out here for a little bit. But so the first part of this question, before we move to the ETF questions, is so we have the QBTC fund, the Galaxy fund is there. I think another one launched a couple weeks ago. So what is it that distinguishes these funds from one another? Like from an investor perspective, what should they be looking at in terms of what the difference is between these different funds?
Yeah, so there's two things that I would look at just at a quick high level, because if I'm putting my money in, I want to make sure I get the biggest amount of Bitcoin equivalent, right? And right. So I look at the fees. And
sorry to interrupt, but you're not still engaged by any of these, are you? Just for disclosures and biases and stuff? No. Okay.
No, my consulting contract ended, and I'm just like an advocate of let's get more people more access, right?
More Bitcoin. Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No problem. So if you look at the fees, right? If I'm paying 1.95 or 1%, like that's something that if I haven't put money in yet, that makes a difference, because I'd rather be saving that 1%, because every year that gets taken out as a management fee from my stack. So that's one thing that I look at. Two is if I'm about to throw a bunch of money in, so I log into Questrade or Wealthsimple or whichever broker I use, maybe it's my bank, and I click buy, I want to make sure that there's no premium, or the premium is the lowest one. So we go for bitbo.io is a fantastic website, and it shows the premium live, as in at this point in time, is there a premium between the net asset value NAV and the actual price that the shares are selling at. So for example, it's been as high as 45% over NAV, the premium, around, I was really watching it around November, December, it kind of averaged around 20%. So basically, that money represents the demand. So a closed-end fund like 3IQ's QBTC or Grayscale Trust or the Galaxy, Novogratz's CI Galaxy fund. They have been trading, so they're closed end, and so they typically buy at IPO, initial public offering, and then occasionally more money is added through reopenings, like that are kind of sporadic. Some Galaxy, I don't think has had a reopening yet. 3IQ had multiple reopenings. So we're basically, they say, hey, we're reopening the fund, more money comes in. It's kind of like a mini IPO, I guess, if you could consider it that way. And so more money, maybe people put in $1 million, right? And then that fund then takes that $1 million and buys Bitcoin with it. And so that gets added to the net asset value, and that gets recalculated based on the price that was bought at. But when these funds trade on secondary markets, so Grayscale trades the secondary markets, some of the Canadian funds like 3IQ trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange, there's a limited amount of units that are issued. If there is higher demand for these units, and the reason there would be, well, for example, in Canada, we have tax advantaged accounts, and similar in the US. So in Canada, we have a tax-free savings account. So if I put in, for example, $10,000 at the low of last year. So Bitcoin was trading at about, $4,000 or $5,000, depending on, I think the fund kind of came around that time. So if I maxed out my tax-free savings account, Canadians have at the moment about $75,000 they could put in, like that basically 10x'd. So that could have been, almost $750,000 that you would not pay taxes on if you sold. So, there's certain reasons that yes, not your keys, not your coins, but honestly, like I want that tax-free, benefit. So that's one reason. Others are just, I don't know how to deal with Bitcoin. It's just so much easier to go into my brokerage account and buy it. Maybe I don't trust, I don't want to be like the Ripple guy. I don't want to be like the landfill guy. So some people are just more comfortable buying Bitcoin and just holding it in a regular account, right? And some institutions maybe, based on kind of their investment mandate or restrictions, maybe they can't custody themselves, so they have to go through a vehicle like this. So there are reasons why there's a higher demand for these shares than the net asset value, and that shows up as the premium. And that's why the ETF is really cool, and it will likely help with that premium, because unlike a closed-end fund, it purchases units on a continuous basis. So if there's a big demand, like Elon tweets, like as we saw with Elon, or Tesla buys, like people went crazy. We saw the price shoot up. And, so if there's excess demand, like that premium at that point usually typically rises when the price is going up, and the premium tends to fall when the price is going down. So, in those kind of instances, when a lot of people want to buy that, it's a lot better to have something like an ETF, because they're buying in at NAV, and it's more efficient and effective, and you're not paying that premium. So I think it's great news for retail.
Totally. And before we move on to that subject, just two more things on the trust. One is, again, is the difference between trusts how they manage and the cost. And then another one about the trust is, so are you saying that the people, when they make their offering, investors come in, they increase their net asset value. So those investors are basically getting Bitcoin for no additional premium. And then people that buy the trust product units on the market, they're having to pay whatever premium the market dictates based on the net asset value. And then the trust increases the net asset value as a result of flows from the market. Is that how it works? And if so, how come people wouldn't just buy the offering rather than buying it on the market?
Yeah, so depending on which fund. So for example, Grayscale, my understanding is it's only like, qualified buyers are allowed to purchase the units directly from Grayscale. So you have to be maybe accredited, or you have to be a large institution to participate, at the buying in at net asset value at NAV. And so, that kind of, in some ways, retail gets cut out. But these guys have to hold on to, for Grayscale, it's about 6 months. And I believe, for example, for 3IQ, you have to hold it. You cannot sell there's a hold period of 4 months. And so, they come in, they purchase, and they hold it, but they bought in at NAV, and down the road, there's things that these institutions can do, like, taking longs and shorts, and that's a little bit beyond my scope, but the point is that they can set it up as though, so that they can just take advantage of that 20% arbitrage. And so, and they have been doing that. Like, there's a huge amount of trading with Grayscale where it is actually institutions taking advantage of that arbitrage, but they're able to do that because there's sufficient demand on secondary markets when they're finally able to trade, that they can then sell to, retail or other buyers that maybe can't take advantage of that, of buying it at NAV. And so that's why it's awesome that the ETF is coming, because anybody can buy in at NAV. And so when I'm looking at these funds, what matters to me, up until the ETF, where more than likely it will be trading at NAV. So I want to know, what fees am I paying? And I want to know, if there's a premium that I'm paying. And so, there's a few more, actually. It's really interesting, because when I dug into the government website where people have put forward their applications. So not only did we just get an ETF approved, we have 5 more ETFs in Canada in the works. So, and they really range in the management fees from 1.75 to 0.7%. And it's really interesting because they're starting to get more creative. So for example, 3IQ is also launching an ETF of both custodying Bitcoin, but also Bitcoin futures. So they're going to have a mix. There's 2 more, Evolve and Arc Novum. Those are going to be Bitcoin ETFs. We have Horizon ETFs, which are really well, kind of a more well-known name, and they're going to be launching futures. But this is really interesting. They're doing kind of like a long and short structure, so an inverse of the initial futures. So they're creating 2 at this, 2 at the same time. And then, so yeah, you can go long and short your Bitcoin. And then we have one more called Accelerate, and they are doing also futures. So we're starting to see a big diversity. You asked kind of what the difference is. Honestly, they're all using qualified custodians, whether it's Galaxy, what's the other, there's another one that's commonly used. I think it's BitGo. So it's not,
BitGo, Nox, Gemini.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, Gemini. Yeah, Gemini. And so a lot of them use Seidel Trust as the main custodian if they're in Canada, because Gemini is a US company. So you have to, there's certain regulations in Canada around if the custodian is not from Canada, you have to have like 100 million assets on your balance sheet. And so a lot of them usually partner with Seidel Trust, which is Canadian, and then Gemini or some others become sub-custodians. So, so it's very similar, like institutional grade custody, right? Whoever the, auditors, it's either EY or RCGT, like they don't really vary that much in terms of, it's more like, okay, who's launching it? Is it like a super well-known name? Because if BlackRock, for example, comes in, like that would get a ton of attention. They have such a good reputation, largest asset manager in the world, something like almost 8 trillion assets under management. If they throw their hat in, I think that will attract a ton of people towards their fund. But in some ways, I think it's almost like who got there first, because I think there's a level of stickiness. Like people are like, what a hassle. Like, is it worth the hassle of, selling it, going through the stress? Like, am I going to have some slippage, rebuying? So I think there's always like some switching fees. I think when it comes down to, some probably, will try to sell because of that, do I want to pay 1 fee or 2% fee? But I think it's more about the new money that's coming in and just, providing more choice. Maybe some people are like, well, I'm already using purpose investments for some of my other stuff. I know them. I want to go there. Others will be like, well, I know 3IQ, they've been around. Or, if some other one, like if Fidelity does their own ETF, like some people might gravitate towards that just because of kind of that brand name. But I think just regular retail will probably look at fees and premiums.
Yeah, it seems like it'll be, for a rational person who, let's say, stickiness is not really a concern. It seems it'll be brand and fees is the
Yeah.
prime determinants of the decision they make. Let me ask you this. What is the purpose of the trusts in an environment where ETFs are available? It seems like ETFs are better in every domain. You're not paying a premium, you're paying lower fees. So what's going to happen to these trusts that are already, let's say, have market caps of, $1 to $500 million, at least in the Canadian market? And obviously much bigger with Grayscale. But what happens to these trust products when the ETFs come on board?
I think the strategic thing would be for the existing funds to roll them into an ETF. So launch an ETF, roll the funds in, and just have it under an ETF structure, because the ETF is more efficient than a closed-end fund. The creation, redemption of units is occurring at a daily basis. It's just better for your consumer. There might be some differences in fees as well, but I'm not 100% sure about that. That's something maybe we ask Greg Foss, who's also a Canadian and does a really good job.
I'm talking to him later this week.
Yeah, maybe that's a question for him. But overall, so I think this could cause a race to the bottom in terms of fees. So if one of the funds is 1% and you're up to you're kind of uncompetitive there, unless you have like a knockout name like Fidelity. Most people, I think, would gravitate towards the lower. So luckily, what it hopefully will do is cause those fees to decrease, and maybe even more so as as each one kind of lowers their fee. I mean, think about it. Let's say the fund just keeps accruing money. So like 3IQ is at $1 billion right now, right? Let's say Bitcoin even 5x's that. The fee is of the NAV, right? Like the bigger the fund size, do you really need the 2%? Is my question out there. But so I think we'll see a bit of that. I know a lot of people have kind of tweeted or DM'd me asking, kind of concerned, if the ETF launches, is that going to cause, instead of a premium, is it going to drop below the premium? And that's kind of tough to say. It's possible that, yes, there will be some people that shift that are causing slightly in excess of selling. So, the demand is not so before it's like tons of demand and now they're dumping. It's possible it might drop a little bit. But what I will say is that, there's a lot of hedge funds out there that are smart, and other kind of institutions that take advantage of any arbitrage opportunity. And if there's an arbitrage opportunity, they will be there. So I wouldn't expect it to fall, drastically, because the market tends to be very efficient, and take care of that. I think, in a bear market, it might be a bit of a different situation where people are, are selling kind of in a panic sell. And so not only, are people selling Bitcoin, but they're also, there's an additional kind of pressure. There's, I think, generally, less liquidity for these funds that are trading than in the Bitcoin market. And so we might see a further kind of decline during a bear market in terms of, it's not a premium, it's, what's the word? I'm missing the word. The opposite of a premium is what is the word?
I should know this too. I'm blanking.
I know,
right now.
I'm blanking. I wrote this so many times since people were DMing.
I'm gonna kick myself later.
Point is, during a bear
discount.
Thank you. Oh my God. Yeah. So I think a bear market is more likely where we see this scenario of a bigger discount. But again, I do think there's a role to play for arbitrage as well. So it's not, a terrible fear. And again, people kind of are lazy, not in a bad way, but it's yeah, whatever. I'll just hold on to it. Maybe they'll drop the fees. It's just much easier than worrying about buying and selling.
So you don't think that the wave of ETFs will eliminate the trust products on the market?
I don't think so, again, because it's hard to, again, there's a switching cost. It's possible that people, the size will decline, but at the same time, if Bitcoin price goes up, the fund size might stay the same. I do think that some might want to do something like rolling it over or converting it to an ETF kind of a situation. But it's honestly definitely like anyone entering, anyone new that's like putting money in or adding to it makes more sense to add it to an ETF from the fee side and from the net asset value side. So I think there's going to be a lot of competition though now with seeing these 5 funds launch in Canada alone. And just thinking about the US, like the US, they've had something like 8 applications for ETFs denied. Van Eck again came in December, and like having worked in government, one of the most common things that we do when we do policy or any kind of new initiative is we look at what are other jurisdictions doing. Well, guess what? Canada now has an ETF. Possibly like in the next few months, maybe even weeks, more ETFs are going to get approved. It's going to get really hard for regulators to say no, because a lot of the concerns they had before, whether they were around, there was insufficient market surveillance or too much, or like market manipulation, or the majority of, trading was happening outside the US, and now CME futures have, significant, if not the largest demand, largest trading volume. And so a lot of those concerns have been assuaged or mitigated or resolved. And so, really it's like, what's holding you back? And you kind of look uncompetitive from a jurisdiction because Canada has already done that. So I think we're likely to see a US ETF too. So there's going to be all these products and like well-known names like Van Eck, launching, and I'm sure BlackRock's working on one, and Fidelity would probably be too. So you're right. I think they would attract and maybe have some switching. So I think honestly, if you're a fund, you have to look at your fee at the moment.
Would the regulators be the one, in Canada's case, you say there's several in the works, would the regulators be the ones to limit how many they provision or they allow, or will they allow the market to determine that, and just ETF providers will be like, well, we're not going to launch number 11 because there's already so many options in the market, and we can't really differentiate ourselves? Will it be a market determination about how many ETFs we ultimately have, or is this more on the regulatory side?
A regulator a regulator has certain mandates. It's, investor protection, market integrity. Are these people criminals that are running these funds? Like, they have to go through, are they following proper procedures? Like, if someone dies, what happens? Is there continuity planning, right? So that's what they regulate. When 3AQ went to trial, the regulator was like, well, it's not in the public interest for the public to be investing in Bitcoin. They got shot down. There was a 26-page ruling that said it's not the regulator that decides what the public invests in. They look at, are these guys criminals, and are they following the law? So it's not like they have a required mandate to set a certain quota. So it would not be the regulator. It more than likely would be the market that decides, so some people might be going by reputation, some people might be going on fees, but it would not be the regulator.
It'll be really interesting to see the products and services that either go away or morph and change in the industry as a result of maybe that NAV to market price premium leaving the market as the ETFs come in.
Yeah, I think if we look at just the funds out there, in some ways, I want to get rid of the middlemen, right? I want to get rid of these funds. I just want to custody myself. Maybe it's even in a qualified custodian, but under me, instead of going through a fund, because all they're doing is buying and holding. And so we're all about, cutting out intermediaries. Why not cut out the fund intermediary? So I'd love to see you be able to custody in Canada, let's just say even with the custodian, but at least you cut out some fees there. So I think, if that kind of product would be exciting, but, because all they're doing is buying and holding. I think some of the ETFs that are coming in, where they also add in futures is interesting. A lot of these are kind of passive strategies, buy and hold. I'm sure there would be some ETFs or other funds that come where they're actually, maybe actively trading, looking for arbitrage opportunities. Possibly they'll be allowing lending out and earning some interest on top of that. So, I think there's a lot of more creative ways. So you say, oh, well, how many ETFs can the world handle? Like there's thousands of ETFs on the Toronto Stock Exchange, on the NASDAQ. I think there's a lot of opportunities still to differentiate yourself. A lot of them are coming in only because regulators have been so, like concerned about market manipulation, etc. But so I think they're trying to be very safe. All we're doing is we're holding Bitcoin, in an institutional grade custodian. But I think as regulators become more comfortable with these, there's room definitely to differentiate yourself with some unique kind of strategy.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think there's going to be a ton of inflows coming in once these ETFs really get off get online here in Canada and especially in the States. I mean, that not only is the seal of approval from the regulators and, as you say, these big institutions offering them and the de-risking, credibility wise and all that kind of stuff, but just it's so much more of a familiar vehicle to people than even trust, but certainly the coins themselves. Mags, I know we were a little late starting. Do you have a few more minutes? I got one or two more questions for you. So, in Bitcoin, we often talk about how governments, regulators will respond to this, emergent phenomenon, revolution, blah, 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 and how, the expectation has always been that there will be pushback because ultimately Bitcoin kind of, pokes at the very root of their power, right? The power of the printing press, the power to issue currency and control flows of money and that kind of stuff. I remember watching Andreas Antonopoulos in a Senate hearing in Canada in 2013, which was interesting. And at the time, they seemed to be asking, reasonably good questions and seemed to be open to the prospect of, really accepting this as an innovation that shouldn't be denied. What is your sense? What is your experience having worked with regulators, policymakers, and institutions in Canada? What is your sense for how the Canadian government and Canadian and large institutions in Canada are approaching or treating Bitcoin as an asset?
I think the one, in terms of the different groups, regulatory, whether regulatory or policy side, the ones that have done the most amount of work has been the Bank of Canada. They've done Bitcoin ownership surveys for a few years now, and they put out different thought pieces about what Bitcoin is and it could mean and how the impacts it could have. They're contemplating, similar to some other countries, a central bank digital currency. So I think in terms of the most thinking about Bitcoin and potential implications has been done at the Bank of Canada. So the thing that people have to, or maybe most people don't actually think about is, so if I'm a regulator or a minister, usually, so let's say I'm an energy minister, I'm just paying attention to what's happening on the energy side. If I'm an economic development minister, there's all these legacy industries, look, there's a pandemic out there, people are losing jobs. My focus is this, and there's so many other policy areas. This is our world. We live, breathe it 24/7. Maybe it's on the radar, but honestly, there's so many other things that are more on the radar. And I think a lot of times, they kind of tend to fall back. What are the existing regulations? Whether that's Canada Tax Revenue Agency, they put out some guidance, but it works within the existing regulatory framework. Same thing with Bitcoin. The regulators have looked at the current regulatory environment in most cases, like Canada and the US, and they've either issued guidance, but the guidance is their interpretation of the existing legislation and regulations. It's not been new regs. For example, we have created a whole new reg for crypto, and here's this taxonomy and how it all fits in. They're just looking at, okay, is it a security? And here's how it fits in, right? Quadriga fell, so they're like, well, custody is really important based on what we saw with Quadriga. So a lot of so the way that Bitcoin and other crypto is classified as a security is the exchange providing you with an immediate delivery, or are they custodying it? And that makes it a security. So they're really working within the existing laws. So I think that's the important part. They have so far not said, hey, we're banning it like India is. So that's a good sign. But I think the longer that this is taking for them to really form a regulated, to form kind of new regulations around, the better for the industry, because now we have, several unicorns. We have Coinbase that's about to go public, and the more money that flows into our industry, especially with Bitcoin price, and the more institutions that get involved, like Tesla, look at, for example, Tesla bought Bitcoin, but as like Elon Musk, when he was looking for a new plant, jurisdictions were falling over themselves. Like, we want this plant here. Like, they want, these kind of companies that are now allocating Bitcoin to their reserves, they employ a lot of people. They're responsible for innovation and patents. They're kind of like a pillar of America in some respect, right? And so the more of these companies that get involved, the more we have Cynthia Loomis, which is a Bitcoiner, and she's on the banking committee, for goodness sake. Canada doesn't have someone like that yet, but hopefully we will get this champion. And the point is, like, as we infiltrate different parts, as we have like these powerful, legendary investors or companies that are advocating for Bitcoin, there is so much money to go towards education and lobbying, and it becomes really difficult then to tear it down, because there's a lot of money then going towards arguing for it, and it just becomes harder. Just like, so I'd be doing that policy work, the Steel Association would come, and it's right away, like, knock on door. Oh, the minister is like, hey, come on in, let's have a conversation. You're really deeply respected. So it takes a while to kind of build that reputation and those relationships with the policymakers. But I think we're on our way. I think we really showed our strength around the AML, KYC rules that were coming out in the US. And I think we're only going to be banding together stronger and in a more organized way, with a lot more money being put towards it. I'm seeing, almost like at amounts donated to the Coin Center, is it Coin Center, who's doing excellent work around policy and thinking and just helping regulators understand. So I think it gets harder and harder to, like, it's not going to be a ban. It's now, how do we kind of finesse any kind of proposal that is detrimental to the industry, that maybe the regulator doesn't fully understand why this doesn't make sense this way, here's a better way to do it, rather than an outright ban. The bigger we grow in terms of money, this money speaks, right?
Totally agree. And I think it would be very difficult to execute a ban in markets that even have this level of maturation, but certainly as it continues on the current trajectory. But what do you feel is... You
have banks, like freaking banks at the federal level are getting involved, and they want to get involved. CNY Mellon, like the oldest bank around, like these. So I think it was really interesting. Once institutions like Fidelity, CNY Mellon, like JP Morgan's, once they all start to get involved, they have those existing relationships. So the problem with, for example, Coinbase or Kraken or any of the startups is they didn't have those relationships with ministers. They couldn't send an email or like call a minister and get or a senator and get an audience. But these groups have been around forever, and they can. And so, typically government tends to listen to them. Maybe not do what they say, but at least get an audience and understand if there's a barrier there. So I think the fact that these groups are getting involved, the fact that Tesla, now owns Bitcoin, they're a lot more likely to pay attention. And Miami, like, look at what's happening there. We have the mayor of Miami, and he is a champion. This is exactly the kind of people we need in government. He is going to the state to try to get regulations like Wyoming, that are very beneficial for Bitcoin. It's been, a strategic advantage for Wyoming in terms of being able to attract different companies to build there, to attract talent to work for these companies. So he's trying to create this hub. And even Andrew Yang, a part of his platform for New York to be the mayor is to make it a Bitcoin, like an open for business for Bitcoin companies. And so I think it's important to have these because they have more sway in some way. If you have like a local champion, advocating to the state to put in new regulations, or if you have a state champion at some point, advocate towards the federal government. So I think it's great that we have these groups, whether it's banks that hold Bitcoin that are then, applying some pressure through their channels. I think like this whole year has been incredible in what we've seen that has happened from the treasuries, from, governments starting to consider it in their treasuries, to banks being able to custody, to like the most conservative industries like Mass Mutual holding Bitcoin. I think we're in a good place right now.
Oh, undeniably. There's so many headwinds, and everybody wants a piece, and greed is a beautiful thing when it's channeled in the right way. But my question was going to be, and like, I'm not saying I think this is an interesting discussion of the trade-offs and how this could play out. But, in my opinion, when Bitcoin is not self-custodied, it's dramatically neutered in its potential and its power. However, the fact that all these custodial options are available, as you said, allows so much more money to come in that then the optionality of people that do custody their Bitcoin and what Bitcoin can represent expands also as the value increases. So all of this development is great, but it is centralizing, control over larger and larger amounts of Bitcoin, which kind of turns Bitcoin into any other asset as far as people who treat it that way. For people that take sovereignty over it and who take possession of it, it amplifies their power effectively. But for everybody else, it kind of just ends up ring fencing it in this, in a typical way, and doesn't really deliver to them the main benefits that make Bitcoin really special. What's your feeling, philosophy, thoughts on that process of how all this development is great, but it's actually, as people are not taking self-custody, it's not really Bitcoin, or at least they're not getting the major benefits of Bitcoin by having that emerge in that way.
Yeah, it's not
having the system evolve in that way.
Uncensorable Bitcoin. If some custodian has it and your government can come along because they're a totalitarian government.
Yeah, it's just another asset that might go up, and you'll have to sell it at some point. Somebody else has control over it. So how do you feel about that?
I think it's empowering to hold Bitcoin for yourself and to use it yourself. So I think these vehicles are important steps to the journey, because I've seen so many times any newbie come along. It's daunting. It is like, it's almost like an analysis paralysis, and they can't take that first step because they're worried about, I don't know enough about custody. I've read about the landfill guy. I've read about the Ripple guy. Like, I'm just terrified. I think it's a first important step, but it's an important one. So owning it, however, you've taken that plunge, and when you take that plunge, you then pay attention to it like that. It's like that, it goes viral in your head. And I think, then you have to undertake that journey yourself. But at least you took that first step. I think that's the hardest part, is taking that first step. And there's so many resources out there. I know we're getting better about it, but it's something that you yourself have to make that choice to do. And there are enough of us that wouldn't even put it in a fund, because it's not like, they don't consider that Bitcoin. They know not your keys, not your coins. So again, it's not for everyone, but you're right. There's a difference. And what's really going to be interesting is so I've seen some regulatory proposals that maybe, they shift towards just custodians, KYC Bitcoin versus non-KYC. But I think there's always going to be markets out there for people that trade amongst themselves, that don't live in this KYC world, that prefer, maybe they are protesting their totalitarian government, or, Alex Gladstein does some phenomenal work around, where Bitcoin is being used. And that's not KYC custody Bitcoin. Like, that is Bitcoin that's like helping people survive, helping them overthrow governments, getting medical supplies to people. And, so I think there's paths for both, but I do think that the more options you have to take that first step is the most important part, because I just see too many people get daunted. But I think once you get on that journey, you want to have your own, because honestly, I think a big aha moment for people is sending it. And sending it on Lightning is even more magical. Like, I don't know when you first sent your Bitcoin transaction, like, you know, it was great. Like maybe it came in within 2 minutes only because like that's where the block was, but seeing it happen within 10 minutes was incredible. But now sending money through your Lightning wallet is even more amazing per se. And it kind of brings back that same magic of like, holy shit, I just sent it to you and you got it. And like, boom, it happened, right? And so I think you kind of have to do it yourself. And that's what I encourage people to do is like buy a little bit and then just send it and transfer it. And then that's how you really understand, like you see it happen, right?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Especially when you compare it to the other options that are available for doing the exact same thing. It's well, you said it. It's magical, right? It really feels like you just broke through somewhere
between countries. Like I've heard so many stories. They're like, "Oh, my money is still stuck. I'm still waiting," and it's just so painful. Honestly, it's kind of funny too because I'm so used to trading 24/7. Like I remember like last week I was doing some trades at like 4 a.m. and it's like, you just can't. And then you go back to the market and you're like, oh crap, that's right, it's closed. Oh, it's a holiday yesterday in Canada. It's like, oh my God.
It makes everything else seem so archaic. You know, like it's just 24-hour open, distributed, fair system of value transfer, right? It's a beautiful thing.
I'm really hoping we're getting like the 9 to 5 or whatever, or the 9 to 4 markets to shift into 24/7.
It's so crazy. It's so crazy that that's still the way it is, especially when you're trading something like Bitcoin. Like you know, you maybe you want to buy some QBTC or the ETF because something's going on, but it's past 4:30. Sorry.
I know. And then actually that's when you see the premiums happen or decline. So I like to watch the premium, but when like Elon did his whole at Bitcoin, it was an inevitable thing. I watched the premium shrink from like, I don't know, several percent to almost like 0 and maybe even under because what's listed there is what it last traded at. But like as Bitcoin runs up, price runs up, and it's like, oh my God, I have to wait till morning. What's it going to be in the morning? I need to buy more, right?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, also shout out to those Bitbo guys because you know that makes. I don't think that was as easily available before, but now you can just always keep an eye on that. Last question for you, Mags. What's exciting you the most in Bitcoin land today, whether it's projects you're working on or something that you're watching? I know we talked about the ETF, which I know is exciting. Anything else going on that's really getting you fired up?
For me, it's just because I spent so many years, I spent a decade working on energy issues and climate change issues, and I'm really starting to see that come together. Yes, it's a lot of energy FUD out there, but at the same time, like there's just so many smart people coming in to have that discourse to kind of break down that energy FUD. But I think like mining is kind of like become at any time when the price goes up, just like, you know, the gold rush, it's the picks and shovels and everyone's like, oh, we got to get mining equipment. We got to invest in miners. I think it's such an interesting space to see. I think it's, and it's actually impacting global, global trade from the perspective of, I don't know if you've heard, but you know, the chips, the ASICs use chips, right? Silicon chips. And there's a deficiency of these to the extent that, and I'm sure in some ways mining might have contributed to that, but the German government now has been asked by their auto industry to negotiate on their behalf, the government with China to get chips. So I think we're like, it's interesting to see how like our industry is influencing, you know, other parts of the world. But I think that whole, like I'm working on some mining on a mining project. So that's what's really exciting to me. And this whole kind of shift towards ESG Bitcoin conversation or green Bitcoin. And I think, you know, I hate seeing this kind of, I think Nick Carter does a great job of explaining why, you know, when they say, you know, sorry, the last article that Nick wrote is a good explanation of like, you know, these aren't apples to koalas kind of comparisons of, you can't compare the Visa network to Bitcoin because of all the reasons that he lists. So that's kind of one area of the energy conversation. But I think when it comes, you know, there's all this FUD saying, hey, Elon's green, how can there be green Bitcoin? So I think starting to get our story out there that there are miners, for example, that are recovering heat and using that heat to heat buildings, to heat industrial processes, and it's not wasted. We're reducing GHGs in oil fields because they can't, because they're normally flaring it, but we're converting methane, which is 24 to 25 times more potent greenhouse gas to CO2 than CO2 to CO2. And so, you know, these kind of stories are coming out. A lot more renewables are coming online. And what I think is really interesting is I think we'll see a demand for kind of green Bitcoin. And it's interesting to kind of watch how that will play out and where it will play out. So if, you know, BlackRock just came in and recently, you know, they are now, they have two funds that they will be investing in Bitcoin through, but Bitcoin kind of shocked the ESG world, the corporate world, in 2018, where their CEO issued a letter to all S&P 500 CEOs saying, hey, you guys need to think about the triple bottom line. It's not just about profit. We need to be thinking about, you know, environmental, social governance. And so it's really interesting with BlackRock coming in, you know, they have to walk the walk, right? Talk the talk. If they are kind of coming in and saying, hey, you need to think about ESG, well, they're getting into Bitcoin. So it's clearly, you know, Bitcoin is not the, you know, the environmental disaster, and there's good things about Bitcoin. So I'm thinking there might be, you know, demand from institutions that maybe have to invest kind of like along an ESG mandate, or they have, you know, maybe there's high net worth individuals that are like, no, you know, like I really care about the planet, so I want my Bitcoin sourced only from renewable miners. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, if there's a market that kind of evolves around that, similar to how that has happened in renewable energy. So there are energy retailers that procure, you know, have contracts directly with renewables generators, and they then sell to clients that are like, hey, you know, I'm LEED certified, I want to be shown to be green, you know, maybe I'm IBM or Google, or I'm the government, and they buy from retailers like Bullfrog Power, and they're willing to pay more. So I think there is such a thing as green Bitcoin from the perspective of, you know, it's reusing heat, it's using renewables, it's reducing carbon, it's maybe using biogas instead of natural gas. So I think, you know, and then if there is that demand and it's big enough, it can cause further that shift towards, you know, green Bitcoin miners coming online, or prioritizing that kind of energy source. And honestly, carbon is a cost center. If, like, for example, Hut 8 initially set up in Alberta, but Alberta, so between like the price of natural gas going up and down, which is also uncertain, like if you're on renewables, you know what your marginal cost is, right? Like if you're wind, solar, it's not the same as consuming, you know, a unit of energy like natural gas all the time. But with carbon tax or cap and trade kind of situations coming in, carbon has a cost. If you're using natural gas, if you're using coal to produce your Bitcoin, that's going to add additional costs to you. And as you know, the world moves towards like cranking down greenhouse gas regulations, you want to make sure you're on renewable and you're not paying extra money. You're not paying dollars per megawatt because you have to meet these standards. So I think there's a lot of interesting things, conversations that are happening and thinking around what is green Bitcoin? How does Bitcoin help green our grid? How does it help manage supply and demand and just capacity across the grid, like load balancing, et cetera? How does it subsidize, you know, building new infrastructure, maybe connecting communities that are disconnected from the grid, or shifting their fuel source? So yeah, I think it's really, that's what excites me right now.
Yeah, it's a super interesting field, and I think for a lot of people, like, you know, people just coming into the space, it'll start their whole thinking about Bitcoin and energy as two separate things will first come, you know, kind of converge in their minds because of the FUD that is everywhere these days. But I think what's really interesting is digging in deeper to the relationship between Bitcoin mining and an energy future that it's positive, it's potential for very, very positive effects on our energy future. And, I find that a super interesting thing to delve into. Too much to go into now, but I know there's some other Bitcoiners that would probably love to, dig into it with you, maybe even do some debate. So maybe we'll put that together in the future and we'll see what kind of insights we can tease out of it.
Like, it's sunny out, right? It's windy out. Like, we are not harnessing that, like 100% of that yet. We're just harnessing a small amount. So like when people are like, oh, you're consuming so much energy. Well, we're not even starting to like even get half of the energy available out there, geothermal. So we got a lot more to go, but thank you for having me on today. This was fun.
Mags, I appreciate it. There's anywhere you want to direct people before we shut it down?
Yeah, sure. MetaMesh.com. We're starting to do some educational videos there around Bitcoin and just some interviews. We're just starting, so patience, starting with some wallet stuff. But also, if you're a Spanish speaker, we have a sister channel, BTC in Espanol. So Joaquin has been providing Bitcoin education since 2014. So he's the longest Spanish channel about Bitcoin, similar to BTC sessions, tons of different content around wallets and analysis and how to use things and tutorials, but in Spanish.
Awesome. Well, I'll check that out. Everyone who wants to learn about Bitcoin in Spanish and maybe engage you guys do you guys work all across the world? You do, right?
Yeah, all across the world in consulting.
Yeah. Awesome. Sweet.
Awesome.
All right. Well, look, thanks for joining me and look forward to the next time we get to speak.
Likewise. Bye.